Hi, and welcome to the NFPA LiNK YouTube channel. This page is dedicated to answering key questions you have related to electrical and life safety. Today we're going to talk about the language in NFPA 1, the Fire Code, that permits compliance with newer editions of reference publications. So we're going to head over to the Fire Code NFPA 1 and Chapter 2, which deals with reference publications. Before I get into the specifics of what allows you to use a newer edition of a reference publication, I want to just highlight what Chapter 2 is and all the information that's contained inside of it. So over here in the table of contents, you'll see 2.2's NFPA publications, 2.3 are other publications, and 2.4 are references for extracts and mandatory sections. So 2.2 and 2.3 both contain all the publications that where elsewhere in the code, we're going to reference another document. So for example, if we head over to 2.2 NFPA publications, you'll see NFPA 13. Somewhere in NFPA 1, you're going to see language something to the effect of a sprinkler system installed in accordance with NFPA 13. You would then come to Chapter 2 to see what edition of NFPA 13 is referenced, and we can see right here it's the 2022 edition. For 2.4, that's for sections that actually extract the text, so the language comes from another source document, and 2.4 just lists those those publications there. I do want to highlight that Chapter 2 only contains reference publications for the body of the code. So if there's a reference publication in an annex, then you'll actually see those listed. If we scroll down, you can see it in Annex F, Informational References. So back to the 2.1s, which is what we were talking about today in the ability to comply with a newer edition of the code. So you can see 2.11 talks about how compliance with subsequent editions of the reference publication shall be considered evidence of compliance with the edition specified in this code. So this is really where it permits you to use subsequent editions. But then it goes on to clarify that the compliance with the subsequent edition of the reference publication has to be achieved by complying with the whole document. So for example, that NFPA 13, we saw that NFPA 13 was the 2022 edition. We now know that the 2025 edition is available. However, when NFPA 1 was published, this is the 2024 edition, so that 2025 edition wouldn't have been available yet. Therefore, they referenced the 2022. But if you were doing work and you wanted to use the 2025 edition of NFPA 13, 2.111 says that's acceptable provided you're complying with the document in its entirety. 2.112 deals with a situation where you only want to use a specific section of a subsequent edition. So if you only wanted to use parts of NFPA 13 of the 2025 edition and do the rest of it to 2022, this talks about how you would need to do that. So it says you have to have approval of the AHJ through technical documentation submitted in compliance with 141 or 142. We can click 141 and we'll see that that brings us to equivalencies, or 142 and that brings us to alternatives. These two sections really work to ensure that you're not just cherry picking certain parts of a newer edition to follow. Sometimes changes are made in documents knowing that other changes are made elsewhere in the code. And so that's why 2111 is going to require compliance with the code in its entirety with the newer edition. This concept of allowing compliance with the reference document in its entirety and not just portions of it is reiterated in the annex. So if you click the annex for 211, we can see that it clearly states that the intent of this is for the AHJ to approve the use of subsequent editions of reference publications only when the entire new edition of the reference standard is used. This paragraph is not intended to permit the use of cherry-picking specific sections of one edition of a reference standard, but to use the entire subsequent edition of the reference standard. And you can see there's annex for 2112. We can see because of the asterisk there. And then again, it talks about you should require technical documentation in compliance with 141 or 142 if only portions of it are to be used. It goes on to say, before approving the use of specific sections of subsequent editions of reference documents and not the entire edition of the subsequent edition, The AHJ should ensure that other changes did not occur to the subsequent edition that might affect the overall level of fire and life safety protection. I hope that clarified when and how the Fire Code permits the use of a newer edition of a reference publication. For more information about how NFPA LiNK gives you the knowledge you need to get the job done right, visit www.nfpa.org/link.